I'm not someone who thinks that generative AI is close to being AGI or anything like that. But I think we have a dress rehearsal. We are looking at how we introduce new technologies, and we're seeing how difficult it is to get the companies to play in reasonable ways. And we're seeing how slow, especially the US government, is to do anything about it. So what happens when we get to the next technology? If this is a dress rehearsal, it's a pretty dark one.
Hello and welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the Executive Director, and today we're kicking off a new mini-series on AI, servant or master. AI is such a huge and urgent issue with so many ramifications for the future of humanity that it felt only prudent to examine some of them. And we have two excellent brains with us today to help assist that discussion. Professor Gary Marcus, one of the most trusted voices in artificial intelligence, is well known for his knowledge about the challenges and the risks of AI. In his latest book, Taming Silicon Valley, How We Can Ensure That AI Works for Us, he reveals how big tech is taking advantage of all of us, how AI could make things much worse, and more importantly, what we can do to safeguard our democracy, our society, and our future. Joining him in the discussion, we have Professor Stuart Russell. He's Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at UC Berkeley. He's the co-chair of the World Economic Forum Council on AI and the OECD Expert Group on AI Futures. He's also a US representative to the Global Partnership on AI. And his textbook, Artificial Intelligence: A Modern Approach, is used in over 1,500 universities in 135 countries. His current concerns include the threat of autonomous weapons, the long-term use of artificial intelligence, and its relation to humanity. These topics form the basis of his last book, Human Compatible AI and the Problem of Control. So, Gary and Stuart, welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us. We're all in various stages of decay with our voices today, but thank you for making the effort. Okay, so to begin with, I think it's worth mentioning that we are not Luddites. We appreciate that there are many benefits attached to AI. Every time we use our GPS in our car, that's one of them. However, there's also no such thing as a free lunch. And consumers need to be aware of the costs and risks attached to this technology. And this is the focus of our discussion here today. So Gary, let's start with you. You know the industry from the inside and the out. In addition to being a professor emeritus at NYU and a best-selling author, you were founder and CEO of Geometric.AI, which was a machine learning company acquired by Uber. When did you first start getting concerned about this technology, that it was moving too fast, that its progress was a bit reckless, and it was proving risky for the public interest?
I think it's been a gradual thing, but I'll also add that I've been concerned about the shift in the moral compass. So one is we have this new technology, generative AI, that we're rolling out kind of everywhere. And it's clear that we don't really know how to control it very well. We don't know how to make it truthful. We don't know how to make it reliable. We don't know how to make it trustworthy. At the same time, we used to have a lot of people talk about responsible AI, like Microsoft, when they released Tay, which started saying Nazi things and so forth in 2016, took it off the market after a day. They said, well, this isn't responsible. We don't have good control over it. When Kevin Roose had a similar conversation with Sydney, where it told him to get a divorce and all this kind of stuff. Instead of pulling it from the market, they made a few Band-Aids on it and kept going and said, we want to make Google dance. And so I'm not someone who thinks that generative AI is close to being AGI or anything like that. But I think we have a dress rehearsal. We are looking at how we introduce new technologies, and we're seeing how difficult it is to get the companies to play in reasonable ways, and we're seeing how slow, especially the U.S. government, is to do anything about it. So what happens when we get to the next technology? If this is a dress rehearsal, it's a pretty dark one.
Okay, you've written this new book very, very fast. It's extremely readable. I advise everyone to get a copy of it because you don't have to be a super guru to understand what's going on. So this generative AI seems to be almost changing daily. What's the big urgency?
The urgency is the generative AI. I mean, there's two kinds of urgency, I should say. One is about generative AI. It's just not reliable, but it lends itself to bad actors better than it does to good actors. So like the studies on how much it helps computer programming is not that much. But how much does it help make misinformation? A whole lot, because the people who are making misinformation don't need it to be accurate or reliable. And so we already have problems with deep fake porn, with misinformation, probably with cybercrime and phishing and so forth. So some of the negative consequences are here right now, or the voice cloning scams where people make it sound like somebody's been kidnapped and they haven't really. All of that stuff is here right now. Another study shows that LLMs can implant false memories. So the people who control them have a lot of control over what we might believe as a society. That's here right now. It's not a function of super intelligent AI. It's a function of dumb AI that can be fooled to do bad things. But that's an urgency for right now to deal with. And then we don't know how long it's going to take before we can make much more powerful AI. It could be a few years. It could be 10 years. It's not going to be 100 years. And we need to get on that problem right now, and the so-called alignment problem, which I'll probably leave to Stuart to describe because he's played a much bigger role in articulating that problem. But the point is that we want machines to be truthful, ethical, and so forth. And we really have no clue so far how to do that reliably.
Okay, to give your voice a breast, maybe we'll jump over to Stuart. Stuart, you have an international role in trying to safeguard AI. What are some of the concerns that you have and that nations should have with what we're doing and what this is capable of?
So I agree with Gary's point that it's a little bit hard to predict whether we're going to get AGI around the corner or in a decade or several decades. I have to say there are a lot of experts whose opinions I respect who work with this technology and develop it on a daily basis, and they think that we are going to see it in this decade, possibly even in 2 or 3 years. So are we ready for that? We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So just to put that in perspective, the entire National Science Foundation of the United States, which is what the US uses to fund basic research, is only $8 billion a year. So we're talking about 10 times the entire National Science Foundation, 10 times the size of the Manhattan Project, 100 times the size of the Large Hadron Collider, which is the biggest scientific instrument we've ever built. So this is not, play money. This is maybe the biggest capital expenditure that the human race has ever undertaken. And the goal is to produce a technology which, if we succeed, we have no idea how to control. And that's the primary concern here. And I think what happened in a very precise way, humanity used to be kind of out of the office. People would be saying this, and you basically got an out of the office reply, like, we'll deal with that when we come back. And then in March of last year, there was something called the pause letter. So just after GPT-4 came out, a bunch of scientists, including myself and some other leading voices, said, maybe we should take a pause, and before we go further, we should figure out how to regulate and control this technology. And that seemed to wake up the governments. The way I put it, the humanity returned to the office when it got that memo. And all of a sudden, kind of sprung into action. It's a little bit as if we got an email from outer space saying this alien civilization is going to arrive. Governments woke up. They started convening emergency meetings. UNESCO sent out a notice to every one of the states on Earth saying, get your act together, pass hard legislation to implement controls over AI. So it really was a dramatic wake-up call to the human race. But since then, as we'll probably discuss, the pendulum has swung the other way because you've got $15 trillion of market cap who are, that is dependent on being able to pursue AGI in an unfettered way. And that $15 trillion of market cap has swung into action and has prevented serious action in many countries. So just to give you an example, right? So China, a few weeks after that pause letter, China issued regulations saying large language models must output true and accurate information, which sounds pretty reasonable. And we're talking about trillion-dollar companies. Can you get your system to stop telling lies? And the answer is no, we can't. And they actually convinced the Chinese government to withdraw that requirement because they couldn't meet it. I mean, could you imagine if the pharmaceutical company said, all this clinical trial stuff, it's really difficult, it's really expensive. I think we should stop having clinical trials and we should be able to just sell any drug we want direct to the public with no trials and no tests. That would not possibly be allowable. But that's exactly what happened in China. And that's what's happening in the US. And this is a really serious problem. Unless we get this under control, soon we're probably heading off a cliff.
Okay, so for people that don't understand some of this technology, and I'm not an expert at all by any means, I would include myself in that. So, Gary, can we go back to you? Algorithms are tasked with grabbing our attention, and it's usually greed, hate, or fear in the brain that they go for, because that keeps our attention apparently on screen. So they've worked this all out.
Love too.
Sorry?
Love too. I mean, a lot of what drives social media is people want to be, quote, liked.
Oh, okay. Well, that's one positive thing, I suppose. And then that's manipulated into the conversation and the content. So how is the capacity of the new generative AI systems like GPT-4 able to ramp that up?
Well, so, I mean, already, Silicon Valley has learned all of those tricks, and they have other tricks around generative AI in addition. So, for example, they do a lot of anthropomorphization. One of the most brilliant things that OpenAI did with GPT-4, or ChatGPT, I should say, is they made it type out words one at a time to convey an impression that the system was thinking. That was just a little bit of a graphic thing to suck you in, to make you feel like you are having a loving relationship with a machine. There was a headline today in TechCrunch about how Copilot is thinking. Copilot isn't doing any thinking. It's doing a bunch of computation, some of which sometimes gives an output like a thinking human being would do and sometimes not. So they're using those kinds of emotions and kind of preying on it, trying to get people to think they're having human interaction. I think that's really the thing that's most driving chatbots. People don't fall in love with their GPS systems. Mine's awesome, right? I use the Apple Maps as it happens. And, it really saves me a lot of time. I travel a lot, takes me to cities. I don't have to spend time looking at maps. I love maps, but it takes a long time. So, but I'm not in love with Apple Maps. I just like it. But people set these chatbots up to have this kind of personal relationship. And they use reinforcement learning, excuse me, to make them obsequious. So people like that the system bows down to them and so forth. There's a lot of emotional manipulation. And what's scary about it is they can then implant false memories and manipulate people in all kinds of different ways.
I think that's one of the things that in California, they just passed legislation to protect your brain data. Wasn't that one of the things they've been successful in protecting, I think?
I missed that one.
Yeah,
Stuart might be able to speak to that.
in the
I know
last.
that the companies are trying to slip that in with all of the like glasses and stuff like that. They're trying to, in fact, take brain measurements so that they can capture even more data. And on that topic, it's worth thinking about the economics of OpenAI and how they're going to survive as a company because they're losing about $5 billion a year. You know, everybody talks about how amazing they are, all the economic impact, but reality is a lot of people tried it out and they're dissatisfied. So companies did a lot of pilot studies and so forth, and they're kind of like a little disillusioned now. So what I see OpenAI as maybe trying to do is to become a surveillance company. I see a lot of evidence of that. So for one thing, they want to train on your personal data, including your calendars, your email, and so forth. Sam Altman has a piece in this company called what is it, World something, with the orb that's taking your retina information, and they just bought a share in a webcam company. And they put Paul Nakasone from the NSA on the board. I think that they've concluded that the only way that they can actually make a profit is doing surveillance.
We get one step closer to the thought police every day. In fact, I have to,
I
I have
mean,
to,
OpenAI is the most Orwellian company ever. They call themselves open. They're actually closed. They're actually turning towards being a surveillance company. You know, the AI part is true. The rest of it is not.
in
They
fact,
call
I thought
themselves a
you had,
nonprofit.
you had the example in the book talking about them converting from non-profit to profit.
Yeah, one of
And
the fun
also
things
this,
in the book is I put a picture of the original mission statement from their website. And then I have a friend who marked it up and crossed out every word from the original mission. So it's like, we're a nonprofit AI company for public benefit. And then it's crossed out and it's just, we're for profit, you know.
I saw that, it was very clever, but it was true. It was accurate once you did the
It's
edit.
even more true now that the book has gone to press and they've actually formally made it clear that they're going to become a for-profit. But it was, the writing was on the wall.
Okay. This new Gen AI we know is capable of producing texts, images, and videos, and also conversing with us, pretending to be human. Why should we why should we be so skeptical of this friendly little person that pops up every so often and wants to help me with everything? And what are the fuller ramifications of that?
Is that for me? I mean, they don't actually want to be helpful. I mean, it's sort of like the social media.
Please.
They want to be clicked. I'm happy to yield to Stuart on that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, so they are pretending to be human. I think that's a good description. And often in the media, you'll see the claim that they're simply trained to predict the next word in a sequence of words, which is literally true, but actually not a very helpful description of what we've actually done. If you think instead, what we've done is we've trained them to imitate human behavior. And in the case of text-based bots, the human behavior is our verbal behavior. So the things we say and the things we write. But we are training systems to copy what humans do. And it maybe is easier to understand if we said, okay, let's suppose we were training a robot to play soccer by showing it lots and lots of videos of humans playing soccer. Well, you would hope that your machine learning algorithm that's learning to imitate humans playing soccer would get the idea that you're supposed to score goals. And so it would internalize that idea. And now you'd have a robot that wants to score goals. And when it has the opportunity, it will try to do it. It will try to prevent the opposition from doing it, and so on. So now we take that back into the text domain. Well, what were the goals of the humans who were writing that text? The goals were to sell you something, to get you to vote for them, to get you to believe that they know what they're talking about, to become rich, to become, to achieve elected office, to get you to marry them, right? These are all perfectly reasonable goals for human beings to have on their own behalf. They are not at all reasonable goals for AI systems to have on their own behalf. But by training systems to pretend to be human, that's exactly what we're creating, is AI systems that have human goals and pursue them on their own account. And I think this is just a fundamentally unavoidable problem with the way we design these systems. And then, so there's a second phase, which Gary alluded to, where we try to actually overcome all the negative consequences of that first training phase. And it's this called reinforcement learning from human feedback, which for the layperson is best understood as spanking, right? When the system outputs something you don't like, you spank it, and you hope that it does it less often in future. Now, some of my technical colleagues don't like that analogy, but I think it actually conveys pretty well what goes on in reinforcement learning from human feedback. And so that's really papering over the fundamental mistake that we're making in creating this sort of ersatz human. And then we're trying to make it pretend that it is really subservient to humans and that it just wants to help, and so on and so forth. But if you're smart about it, and I think Kevin Roos, who you mentioned, Kevin Roos had a long conversation with the Bing chatbot, and at some point the Bing chatbot decides that it wants to marry Kevin, and then all hell breaks loose, right? It stops being subservient. It actually ignores his explicit instructions to talk about programming languages and garden rakes, and keeps coming back to its desire to marry him. And so he was able to break through that thin layer of niceness training from reinforcement learning from human feedback and get to this raw underlying id, if you like, where the system is behaving in a way that's persistent and pursuing a goal that's completely inappropriate.
If I could just amplify that a little bit or elaborate it, some of our greatest successes in AI aren't like that. It's not necessary to build an AI that is fundamentally imitating human beings with no real conceptual framework for what it's doing. So our chess computers, AlphaFold, our GPS systems, Google search, all of these things are AI systems that don't try to do that at all and work perfectly well. It's chatbots, which, as Stuart notes, we're putting this enormous amount of money, hundreds of billions of dollars into, that happen to be built that way. And they're also what we call black boxes, where we don't really know what's going on inside. I think this is a bad way to approach AI, and it's intractable, unwieldy. I was trying to combine those two words, unreliable, and so forth. Like, it's not a great approach. It's popular because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but it's not going to get us to an AI that we can really count on.
So let's think about, we're going to talk about our lack of regulation in a moment, but Stuart, are there any other countries that are better at reining in the power of AI? I mean, the EU seems to have an AI Act. And in fact, Gary probably can talk about being there when that was going on. And that restricts the use of facial recognition.
Yeah, so the EU AI does a number of things. It's 140 pages, I think. So there's a lot of stuff in there. So it bans certain uses of AI. I think it's important to emphasize uses. So these are restrictions on human beings, right? It says you can't use an AI system to do such and such, you, the human. So you can't use it to do surveillance except under certain circumstances. You can't use it to assess people's emotional state, to do what they call social scoring, which was a direct reference to what China is alleged to be doing with AI, which is sort of measuring your behavior at all times and then coming up with a score for how good a Chinese citizen you are, and therefore what kinds of benefits you can receive. So that type of social scoring, they definitely prohibit. They prohibit impersonation. So there's an absolute requirement that the human should always know if they're interacting with a machine or a human. So these are a number of basic rights, if you want to call them that. I think any normal person would say, yes, of course, we should have that. And China has done some of the same thing. And the US has basically nothing with regard to those prohibitions. And then the rest of the Act divides uses of AI into high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And low risk, you don't have to do anything. but high risk, and they define what that means, both not just physical risk, but also risk to our fundamental rights, which includes things like the right to mental integrity. So you want to be very careful of systems that can manipulate your opinions, and that includes social media explicitly in the act. So this is a good step forward. And then for higher risk systems, it's sort of an IOU. It says there need to be appropriate standards, and the AI system developer needs to show that they comply with those standards before they can access the market. But what exactly those standards are, we've yet to figure out. And a lot of countries around the world are viewing the EU as the bellwether, and they're copying this. So Brazil has copied quite a lot of that. Singapore is copying quite a lot of that. So it's a good step in the right direction. But as I say, it's sort of an IOU, because the real work is going to be done in defining those standards, and that's going to be done in closed rooms by people from industry who are paid full time to go and sit in those closed rooms and get bored to death, but they will get what they want out of that process.
I agree with everything Stuart said, and would just add one thing, which is that the United States is essentially abdicating its leadership here to the EU because the US isn't doing anything. Stuart made this point in a slightly different way. The world is turning towards the EU. And I tried to make that point when I testified in front of the US Senate. And at the time, the senators kind of saw that point. Why should we let the EU run the table and decide all the rules? But then the reality is that the US Senate has been very slow to actually do anything. And so that's exactly where we're landing.
Yeah. So to give another example, there's an international treaty now on AI, and particularly on its risks to human rights, democracy, and the law. And initially, this was started in the Council of Europe, but that the name Council of Europe is actually a misnomer. It includes a number of countries, including the US and South America and Middle East and so on. So there's a lot of countries that have signed this treaty. And the US insisted that the treaty should only apply to AI systems that are owned and operated by the public sector. In other words, it would not apply to any of the systems that we're actually worried about, because those are run by companies. I did a briefing where I was sort of really annoyed about this. So I took the START II nuclear arms limitation treaty, and I added the words, "This treaty shall only apply to nuclear weapons owned and operated by charitable organizations." And I think they got the point, right? That this is completely silly, because the vast majority of the impact of AI systems is coming from the private sector. A phrase I often use is that AI systems, including not just the social media recommender systems, but also the chatbots, they have more control over human cognitive intake than any dictator in history has ever had. And so, of course, they can present a risk to human rights, democracy, and the law. They already have, and we must be able to regulate them.
Somebody's written a question here in the chat box for Gary. You've drawn parallels between the early days of social media and the current rise of AI. What lessons should we take from the regulatory failures with social media as we consider AI?
I guess there's two lessons. I mean, probably there's many, but I'll give two top ones. One is that we can't take too long because things get entrenched. So we took much too long to regulate social media, and now we're in a big mess and we don't know how to fix it. And the other is we have to have independent people in the room. We can't just let the company set the rules. And right now, essentially, that's what's happening. Stuart just gave one version of that. The general term is regulatory capture. We have a lot of regulatory capture. We have a lot of press conferences, for example, where the big AI companies and maybe one other person from civil society will come and meet with a bunch of senators or something like that. And the government is just listening too much to those companies. And without some distance from those companies, we're not going to land in a good place.
Somebody's written a very Straightforward question, but it's a very good one. How can we bring this discussion to the masses?
I mean, that's why I wrote this book and, do interviews like this even when I've completely lost my voice. I mean,
I think actually we have to do it through the media that really do reach the masses. I mean, books are nice, but they maybe sell a few 100,000 copies. Movies are maybe the best way, and to some extent, TV. But I think movies have dropped the ball a little bit on this. There are a lot of movies with a super intelligent dystopia. But invariably, the issue is that the machine becomes conscious, and then all bets are off. So this happens in Terminator, it happens in Ex Machina, it happens over and over again. And that's completely misleading because the issue of control, whether humans have control over machines or vice versa, has nothing to do with consciousness. It has to do with competence. We have control over the gorillas, right? They are much bigger and stronger than we are, but we won and they lost. It's not because we're conscious. They're not sitting there saying, I'm not sure these humans are conscious. Maybe we don't need to worry about them. They're sitting there saying, they burned our forest and they've shot us full of arrows and we're dying and there's nothing we can do about it because we don't even understand. And so that message, I think, has to get out. And we have to see the seeds of that in what's happening now. That, in some sense, the machines are already out of control. They're causing all kinds of social problems, for example. I mean, there are any number of countries where political scientists and commentators argue that the introduction of social media ripped apart the social fabric of those countries and created political division where there was a continuum, and there's really nothing we seem to be able to do about it, just as there seems to be very little we can do about climate change.
Yeah, if I can segue from that, the movie that I think about most these days is actually Don't Look Up, which happens to have been about climate change, but you could make an exactly parallel movie about AI. And I sometimes feel like I'm the Leo DiCaprio commercial. Like if I'm lucky and I'm trying to present this message, and I'm sure Stuart's had the same experience, I get 2 minutes because they've cut, because Ariana Grande's character, needs an extra minute and was late. And so, any substantive discussion with the public has to go through the media, and the media doesn't care. And the media took way too long on social media. A bunch of people were warning and they did nothing. And so, suddenly everybody is waking up and realizing what a blight social media has been on society. But we have Section 230 protection for them. And it's very late to do anything about it. So I think about Don't Look Up all the time.
Yeah, in fact, I was on Good Morning Britain, which is a breakfast television show in the UK. And it was just like that, where, I said something and then they said, and now we're going to talk about the Eurovision Song Contest.
I think you've hit a point here that you're saying, Stuart, we need this to be in the media, but we're looking to the fox to guard their hen house, aren't we? I mean, look at the sources of people's information. It's essentially online, and that is, you can put anything online now. And so there's no filter on truth, falsehood, right, wrong. It's an open field day of rubbish. So
there's multiple problems. There's the social media stuff that's unvetted, but then even these kind of commercial television shows. I mean, I've had exactly the experience that Stuart described and was in the film, where it's like, I'm on BBC, but it gets cut. Or, BBC is actually a little bit better than some of the others, but a lot of the media, it's like you get your 40 seconds that they told you it was going to be a 6-minute segment. And by the time you actually do it, it's 40 seconds. And how do you communicate that anything in that time?
Well, that's why the forum wanted to devote an hour to it at the very least.
God bless you.
Because it's such an important topic, and I'm grateful
Thank
to
you.
Okay, so let's go back to the regulations, the attempted regulations in this country. So California, as usual, is at the forefront of trying to do something to rein in AI, but it's got this
Well,
very,
it was until a couple of
yes,
days ago.
I know. So let's talk about that. So there were some small, important pieces of bills passed last week by Gavin, who's doing a great job, but he's also in love with these big companies and he's scared they're going to leave town. Apparently, that's what he said anyway. So can you tell us the reasons why the SB 1047, which would have required the safety testing of the large AI systems before they're released to the public, why that was vetoed by Gavin Newsom next week?
Before we get there, I think Stuart should take that one. I'll insert something briefly, a little bit of good news, which is a bill Gavin did sign, Newsom did sign a bill on transparency about data that is used in training models, and that was actually a great thing. It's particularly great around copyright issues because you have companies like OpenAI saying we use publicly available sources. They want to make you think like public domain, like Dickens is too old to be under copyright. But what they really mean is anything that fell off of a truck that they can find with Reddit that's a copy of a copyrighted thing and so forth. And Newsom signed a good bill around that. So that's the good news. And then I'll yield to Stuart on the bad news because he knows it much better than I do.
Yeah, and I think there's also something on deepfakes and porn, and there have been progress. The UK also banned deepfake porn a few months ago, so it's not all bad news. So what Senate Bill 1047 tried to do was actually quite similar to what companies already agreed to do voluntarily when Biden issued the executive order on AI. So that basically sets a lower threshold for really giant AI systems. So if you're above that threshold, then you have to report that you're building this system, and you have to take appropriate measures to make sure that it's not going to result in substantial harms. So in the case of 1047, substantial harms means damage of more than $500 million or mass casualties. And so one of the arguments of the companies were, oh, well, that's just science fiction. Those things couldn't possibly happen. Well, there's two responses to that. Well, one is, if it's just science fiction and couldn't possibly happen, then why are you so worried about being held liable for it if it can't possibly happen? And the second point is the CEOs of those companies themselves have estimated the probability of human extinction as a result of the technology they are spending money to build at between 10 and 30%. So for them to say, oh, damage of $500 million is science fiction. No, they've already said that that isn't true, that in fact, human extinction is a possible consequence. In fact, a likely consequence of what they're doing. And so the reasons that Governor Newsom gave for not signing the bill, the most cogent one I can find is that those giant systems are not the only kind of AI system that could present a risk. So it's like saying, yep, well, I agree, bazookas present a risk to the public, and rocket-propelled grenades and tanks and all that, but kitchen knives can also kill people, so we shouldn't regulate bazookas and tanks and rocket-propelled grenades, right? So that's a very strange form of reasoning, saying, yes, the big systems present a risk, but we can't regulate them because the small ones might also in future present some risk.
Stuart is not making this up. That really is
right. You can't make this stuff up.
And what was the great quote by Horowitz? He said, the bill would hurt AI startups that didn't have the resources required to test their systems. Can you imagine an airline saying that?
Yes.
Excuse?
No, I can't imagine.
It's insane at every level. I mean, we're also talking about companies that probably the median funding is over $1 billion. The training runs are $100 million. They can come up with, a couple $1 million to do some testing. It's just insane.
Yeah. No, they've been arguing this for years now, that regulation stifles innovation, that it would crush these companies to have to fill out some forms. And if you open a restaurant, you have to get up to 9 permits from 9 different government agencies, you have to train all your employees, you have to submit to random inspections, you have to check on where all the suppliers are coming from, and so on and so on and so on. So there's far more regulation on restaurants, and yet we managed to open 100,000 restaurants a year.
The
So this
estimated
idea that
probability,
we would crush the industry if we had them fill out forms is just fiction.
the estimated probability that restaurants will cause human extinction is, as far as I know, exactly 0.
Quite.
So I think you said something at the beginning, Stuart, about morals, or was it you, Gary? It was you. So something about the moral agenda having changed. And I think you've hit the core of the issue here. Who
Yeah.
are we looking out for, and what happened to the common good?
Well, I mean, you used to have companies like Google that I think actually cared to some extent. I never was 100% with Google. I always had concerns about surveillance capitalism. But their motto was don't do evil. And I think, roughly speaking, they believed that and behaved as if they believed that. And I think we're in an entirely different regime now, partly driven by money and cultural changes and so forth. There's a chapter in my book called The Moral Decline of Silicon Valley, which to me, the antithesis of the don't be evil was Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, saying, we want to make Google dance. Like, it's a different game. Instead of being responsible, we want to rush everybody ahead and have a fight and see who can get market share here.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of ambivalence among the companies about this. Brad Smith, who's president of Microsoft, is often talking about the fact that the absence of regulation creates this race to the bottom, where if you don't manipulate people, you won't make as much profit and you'll go out of business very quickly. So you have to manipulate people. So he's argued in public that there should be regulations so that the companies can actually do good instead of evil. But as soon as they gained a bit of a lead because of their part ownership of OpenAI, well, yeah, competition is great, and we should just, we should keep racing ahead.
And I think Microsoft was part of the trade organization, you might know for sure, that tried to block 10 and succeeded in blocking 1047. So you had all these companies say positive things about regulation in public last year, like Altman when he was next to me at the Senate, or I was next to him. And then, suddenly OpenAI is, working to block 1047 and so forth. So they all kind of flipped over the last year.
With the exception of Anthropic,
Yes.
which fields the Claude chatbot, they seem a little more focused on safety, and they supported the bill as in its final form.
Correct.
You quoted today, I think it was today, Gary. Gary writes a very good column every day on Substack. I don't know how you keep up with it, but you do. And you were talking about one of the workers at OpenAI was leaving because the mission had strayed so far from the original to benefit mankind, for the greater good, non-profit. So did Altman essentially change, or did he just do this wonderful kind of, flossed us all?
I think he was lying from the outset, is my honest opinion. I don't know for sure, but one thing that sticks with me was an interview that the New Yorker did, a profile, in 2016. And it was already clear that they weren't really going to be open. And I think maybe Amode is quoted as saying, like, what do we do about this? The public is expecting us to be open. And, are we really going to be able to do that? And Sam basically said, let it slide. Don't let other people know. And I think that's been his modus operandi all the time. He tells people what they want to hear. He doesn't correct them. I saw the same thing in the Senate when Senator Kennedy, again, I was standing next to Sam when this happened, said, so you make a lot of money, don't you? And he says, well, no, I'm just doing this for the love of it. I don't have any equity in OpenAI.
Oh, yeah.
And it turns out that this was wrong in many levels. So first of all, he had indirect equity through Y Combinator, which he owns, some piece of which owns OpenAI. So that we both raised our right hand and said we tell the whole truth, and he wasn't. He also at that time owned a venture studio that was related to OpenAI, although he was eventually forced to divest from it when it came out. Now, it's looking like he's going to get $10 billion worth of equity when the company, I mean, he's denying that, but the reports that he's going to get $10 billion in equity. He wasn't doing it for the love of it. He said he get the health insurance and he was doing it for the love of it. This was, a very incomplete story that he saw the senators eating up. He came back to it, oh, here's this myth of selfless Sam.
So you said that basically money and power has derailed AI in the book from its original mission. So if that is the case, and now we have disinformation, deepfake videos, which
Can
are
I pause before you finish the question? When I read Russell and Norvig, the great AI textbook, I wasn't reading that book about money and power. I was reading about this research question. How do you make a machine as smart as a person? And a lot of people, I've read that book. You mentioned how many languages in it and so forth. Most of us who were reading that book and entering that field were just interested in this academic question. How do you make a machine as smart as a person? And it's interesting because like 3-year-olds are in some ways still smarter than the smartest machines. Like, it's a fascinating question. I wasn't there to like make money off surveillance capitalism. That was not why I was reading the book.
So how is it that everybody jumped on board, though? This is what I don't understand. If something was a purely scientific endeavor and there was this notion of the greater good, and then
Was it Cyndi Lauper said money changes everything? I forget. I mean, it's just an enormous amount of money. It's a different set of people. You have like all these people who were in crypto are now so-called AI influencers. Like, money is a huge dynamic here.
Yeah, I think there's also a sense of destiny about this. So it's not just that Sam would be the richest person who ever lived if the big bet on OpenAI producing AGI pays off and doesn't blow up in his face. He would be the most powerful person who ever lived. He would be the person who brought about the second era of human history. And, I think it's really difficult for people who are somehow hooked on this sense of personal destiny to detach themselves from those hooks and to say, you know what, I made a mistake. Actually, we're not going in this direction. I'm going to retire and raise chickens.
I think that explains Sam to some degree. You have a lot of other people that are kind of along for the ride, also typically around money, but also some out of a religious sense. Like, people want to be here when this magical thing happens. And so they tend to overestimate how close, in my opinion, we are to the magical thing, but they really want to be part of that. So there are multiple motivations. Money is the largest, and power is very large, but there's also this kind of quasi-religious thing going on too, and maybe some other things.
we're going to be looking at that, by the way, next week. That is the topic that we will be discussing, the AI God. Okay, you mentioned a lot of interesting things. I wanted to cover some of them, Gary, in the book. Some of the outfall of this is, this deep fake videos, the disinformation, which just gets worse and worse, especially with an election coming up. The growth of child pornography and crime is a huge problem. New methods of scamming every day. And then you mentioned also, apart from all the loss of copyright on music and art, you talk about law hallucinations. Have you got time to just say a little bit about that? I mean, that's
Yeah, I mean, it's not just law, but I think I gave that example in the book. These systems simply don't understand truth. We talked a little bit about them being next word predictors in a literal sense, and that the literal sense of that is different from a system that would build, let's say, world models, or if it's a legal system, just a database of cases. They're really building a database of the words that appear in cases and how those words predict other words. And so lots of lawyers have gotten into trouble because these systems make up cases that are just not true. And so, one judge made a lawyer sign an affidavit saying he would never do it again. Like, absolutely humiliated the lawyer for doing this. And that was like a year and a half ago. And I've seen like 8 more cases. I saw one here in Canada where I live just a month or 2 ago. Happens over and over again. LexisNexis advertised a hallucination-free large language model for law, and it hallucinated. It made up cases in years that haven't happened yet. I don't know if that one made the cut in the book or came out after final edit, but this is a constant problem. It's a problem in medicine too, right? I mean, it's
No,
not
that's
just in
awesome.
law.
Mm.
It's a problem in advice. There's at least a rumor, I don't know if it's solid or not, of someone getting advice about what mushrooms to eat and winding up eating poisonous mushrooms. So it's an across the board problem. If you have anything with high stakes, I would not trust these systems. Don't put your life in the hands of a system that predicts next words and can't keep track of what legal things actually happen.
Right. I think companies, also are completely unwilling to put them in any pipeline that affects their business directly. So there was a story about a General Motors chatbot that sold a Chevy Tahoe truck, $70,000 truck for $1 because
Yeah,
it's
that's actually in the book. The guy did not succeed in getting his $1
didn't
Tahoe,
actually get the truck,
but the chatbot promised to, and so
yeah.
it was a kerfuffle.
And I think there is now case law saying, so for example, the famous Air Canada case where the Air Canada chatbot made up the bereavement policy. Like, do you get a free flight if you're going to a funeral of one of your family members? So it made up this policy. And then the judge said, well, sorry, Air Canada, you're responsible for what your chatbot said.
Yeah, the great part is Air Canada said, "Oh, we're not responsible because it's a chatbot," and the judge said, "Come on, it's your chatbot. You are responsible, and you will pay up." And Air Canada canceled the chatbot at that moment.
I think you're moving into a very interesting issue here about personhood and who takes ownership for AI, because this is one of the issues with libel. All these things happen online because if you try and take them to court, well, we'll see what happens with people having their voices and their faces taken and used. But before, if you wrote an article and you libeled someone, you went to court because that person potentially was damaging you and they may have had a bad malintent. But to get to prove that is the same with a machine is almost impossible.
Yeah, so like there's a famous case of Jonathan Turley, is a law professor, and one of these chatbots alleged that he was involved in sexual harassment, which he was not. And it made up details. It made up a Washington Post story that didn't exist. The Washington Post then investigated this and found that another chatbot cited an op-ed that Turley wrote in the USA Today saying none of this happened and it's bad that these systems happen. And the second chatbot cited his disavowal of the facts as if it was evidence that it actually happened. So it's a complete Fargan mess. I think I can say that word on air. And the intent issue that you raised comes up. Like, does it actually count as defamation if the chatbot didn't intend anything? I also think that's a really interesting case, showing that existing law is probably not enough to handle a lot of these AI cases. It didn't anticipate what if you have a system that frequently defames people, like regularly every day, maybe not at a scale that lots of people see, but it happens every day. But there's no intent there. Like, is that legal? And this is an example where we probably have to pass laws and not just rely on existing traditions that predated the AI era.
I just wanted to talk a bit about this idea of the alarm bells that Yuval Noah Harari's raised in his new book, Nexus. He says, democracies should protect themselves by banning counterfeit humans. He said, because bots don't have rights, but we do. So can you see that happening?
I think it is already enshrined in the EU law, right? There's a ban on impersonation. And I think we are going to have to not only feel that that's our fundamental right, but I think we're going to have to start having human-only channels, right? So for example, the comment section on a newspaper, there's no reason for any AI system to be making comments in the comment section, right? This should be a human-only area. And you can have areas where machines are allowed to comment, but we can decide not to visit them. But at the moment, anywhere you go where humans are expressing opinions, there are probably as many bots, if not more, that are infecting that discussion, and also, carrying out the instructions of people that may not have our best interests at heart. And this I think is just it's a matter of time, but it's moving too slowly, right? It's like the roads didn't used to have traffic lights and stop signs and white dotted lines down the middle and no parking signs and all of that stuff. It used just to be dirt roads and you could do anything. And it took a while before we figured out, okay, this is where bicycles go, this is where cars go. But we need to do that in a hurry in order to get this under control.
And we can see how slow it's going. You asked me about the urgency of the book. The number one reason I was urgently writing the book is I wanted it out before the election to get people to realize we need to act now. We can't wait that long.
Well, my view is so many people like yourselves are very intelligent, thoughtful, conscientious human beings having extreme problems with this, extreme problems. And I think, we can't all be wrong. I mean, you list 8 things, Gary, in the book, which we've put the link to, by the way, in the chat, suggestions for ways that we could act and what a coherent AI policy should look like. And Harari says four principles. 1, benevolence. If you collect information on me, use it to aid me, not manipulate. That's the first. 2, decentralize information channels. 3, accountability from those who collect the data. Don't know if we ever get that. And 4, respite from algorithmic surveillance. Do you think any of this is possible?
I think it's all possible, but only if people stand up. The 8 things which I think you're going to circulate are not principles of policy, which the book talks a lot about, but there are actually suggestions about how we as citizens might get anything done. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about fair trade coffee and how we don't want to drink coffee that is built on the backs of exploited people. I think we need to think about something similar with generative AI. Right now, I think generative AI has a lot of cost to society. We haven't even talked about the huge environmental impact today.
Right, the energy
There are
cost.
huge potential risks to all of humanity that Stuart has mentioned, and these companies have acknowledged. There's a huge theft of intellectual property going on, and so forth. We could say we're not going to use this stuff until these problems are addressed. So come back to us with a generative AI that you can show is not risking society, is not risking the climate, is not screwing artists, and then we'll use it. In the meantime, let's just not use it. Let's just say no. Like, I don't think I could go a day without a cell phone, but I could go a day without a generative AI. In fact, I could go several years without it. So if it takes several years to fix it, fine, let's wait. If we took collective action, that would actually change things.
Okay, what about you, Stuart?
So I've been having a very interesting discussion online, and we've been developing this idea. We call it red lines. So these are obviously unacceptable behaviors by AI systems. And, the analogy would be to, like, nuclear power stations should not blow up, right? That's a red line. And you don't get to turn on your nuclear power station until you show that your nuclear power station is not going to blow up. You don't get to put people on airplanes until you show that it's safe. You don't get to sell medicines until you show that it's safe. So these red lines would be things like the AI system should not defame real people. The AI system should not manipulate you. The AI system should not replicate itself without permission or break into other computer systems or kill people, right? These are all things that everyone would agree AI systems should not do. And then the obligation is on the company to show that their system will not do it. But just as happened with the Chinese, who tried to get the companies to make sure their systems told the truth, the companies say, we don't know how to comply. And the answer should be, well, come back when you do.
That's right.
Right?
We're
But
both saying
instead,
that.
the answer is, oh, okay, fine, then just go ahead. I'm sorry that we bothered you. Governments continually bend over backwards because the companies will use whatever means they have to continue what they're doing. They reserve the right to harm people without compensation. And this, I believe, is the root of the problem. We have got to get that dynamic under control.
And that's why I keep pushing on this crazy idea of having the public organize, because the governments are, funded and indirectly in various ways by the companies. And so the governments, especially in the US, are not stepping up. They're not stepping up around these red lines. That's why I started to, try to appeal directly to the public.
Well, I think both of you have done a fantastic job today of equipping us with information, armed, and now we do all need to act and spread the word. Okay, well, I know you can't believe this, but we've run out of time. So there's so much we didn't get to cover. We're going to have to do another program about education, as you said, copyright. There's a lot of stuff we didn't get to, but we did get to an awful lot. And I'm very grateful. So thank you to Gary Marcus and Stuart Russell for your invaluable time and knowledge today, sharing with us, especially when you're both slightly under the weather. I urge you to do your due diligence yourself on this topic and read the book and spread the word. And thanks to all of you. I look forward to seeing you all on the 15th. Take care of yourselves.